The following presentation was produced in the public interest and provided without charge by the producer. The date, September 1st, 1983, a story of the century. Flight 007 is en route to South Korea with 269 passengers aboard, including the distinguished Democratic Congressman Lawrence Patton McDonald. Suddenly, missiles from Soviet fighters tear into the unarmed jumbo jet, sending the giant airliner 35,000 feet to the chilling sea below, as Radio Moscow falsely declares.
The intruder plane did not react to the signals and warnings of the Soviet fighter planes and continued its flight towards the Sea of Japan.
Now comes the rest of the story from Congressman McDonald's courageous widow, as Catherine McDonald tells the horrible truth about everything you wanted to know but couldn't find out until now.
Larry has actually become the first elected U.S. official to be murdered by the Soviet Union. And it will take years for us to learn the true story of his death.
McDonald, who headed the John Birch Society, was on his way to Seoul to attend a meeting marking the anniversary of the Korean Armistice Agreement.
This was a calculated and thought-out decision. It wasn't even the spur of the moment.
This tragedy is more than a headline, more than a diplomatic incident. Many of the people that ride these streets each day knew Larry McDonald as a friend.
Most honest, trustworthy, trusting, kindest, nicest, all the really good adjectives you could say about one person, you could say about him.
Leaving a wife and 5 children behind, Congressman Larry McDonald, presumed dead.
And who gave the order to fire?
Most of those aboard were Orientals, but it's estimated at least 30 American residents were aboard. The best known of them was Democratic Congressman Larry McDonald of Marietta, Georgia, sometimes called the most conservative member of the Congress.
Larry McDonald's family and friends are calling him a hero. One staff official said the congressman died for his country.
The Japanese Defense Agency monitored the following radio transmission from a Soviet fighter pilot. I am about to fire a missile. The target is the Korean Airlines plane. Minutes later, the jumbo jet disappeared from the Japanese radar screen.
We think the Soviets rarely do anything that's not planned or that they think is to their own advantage. They simply do not willy-nilly carry out an act that has no purpose. And we feel that the prime purpose was to destroy Congressman Larry McDonald.
We know what happened, we know who did it, we know how it was done, and the Russians do too.
This was a premeditated, deliberate murder of 265 people, whatever.
I think the Russians are gearing up for war and doing everything that they can to prepare for it. And I feel someday we're going to be in for it.
The Kansas City Times first reported the KAL 007 airliner had landed on Sakhalin Island off the Siberian coast. But within a few hours, the networks and wire services did a 180, with complete rewrites, reporting instead that the plane had crashed into the sea, and its passengers and crew were lost at sea. Media dispatches were quick in coming. The flight, they said, had strayed into Soviet airspace. Not likely, said a retired senior pilot friend of mine, who'd captained just about every big plane type his airline had flown. He was trained to pilot the big 747 until his retirement in the mid-1980s. He said no qualified pilot would take off without having first set the coordinates, or waypoints, for the plane's internal navigation system, a computerized road map the plane would follow to reach its destination. Not only the pilot, but his co-pilot and flight engineer would store waypoints too, and monitor the plane's behavior along the flight path. Is it possible the plane had been forced off course by a hijacking terrorist or terrorists? His answer was yes. And if the plane was being hijacked, could someone on the ground be alerted that a hijacking was in progress? Again, yes. He explained that a hijack transponder button in the 747's cockpit need only be pressed to alert everyone in the business of aviation, in the air and on the ground, that a hijacking is in progress. Even the Soviets would know. With a possible hijack on the inside, and a confirmed Soviet air-to-air missile attack in progress on the outside of the aircraft, we have the makings here of an act of war. Was that what U.S. Secretary of State George Pratt Schultz was referring to when he said the KAL 007 tragedy wasn't worth starting a war over? Congress must call him back on the carpet. Incidentally, after they examine him, Congress should reconvene a full-blown investigation into the missile blow-up of TWA Flight 800, because people who lie for a living should at least be given a chance to clear their conscience, if they have one. So, what was Larry McDonald really all about? Scott Stanley, Jr., managing editor for Robert Welch's American Opinion and the Review of the News, speaking December 10, 1983 in Indianapolis, explained,
Larry McDonald was born April 1, 1935, into a prominent family of Georgia physicians. He was graduated from Davidson College, earned his MD at Emory University, and served as a Navy flight surgeon and then a 3-year residency at the University of Michigan, before joining the world-famous clinic founded by his father in Atlanta. An active member of the John Birch Society, Larry was named a member of our National Council in 1967 at the age of 32 and was elected to Congress in 1974. 2 years later, reviewing Larry's first term, Senator Barry Goldwater said, Dr. McDonald had contributed more to the Congress than any other freshman who has ever come here. And indeed, he had. For immediately upon taking office, McDonald had assembled a superb team of intelligence experts which he put to work methodically documenting the entire range of communist terrorism, subversion, and active measures. The results of these labors he systematically placed in the congressional record, filling the vacuum created by the abolition of the House Committee on Un-American Activities. The communists did not miss the point. To the far left and his friends in America, Larry McDonald was now the leader of a dangerous corps of privately funded intelligence specialists exposing Moscow's manipulation of American policy through the whole range of disarmament, peace, and foreign policy fronts. Congressman McDonald's access to the congressional record, his articles in American Opinion and the Review of the News, and his frequent well-attended speeches nationwide at the invitation of the John Birch Society gave him the unique ability to bypass the liberal media. Soon he established his own foundation to support our educational activities with tax-deductible contributions, and expanded his program into Europe, Asia, and Latin America. He met with the prime ministers of the NATO nations. In the Middle East, he was so trusted that he was received by heads of government not only of Israel, but also of Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. Nations under attack by communist terrorists regularly sought his advice. In Free China, the Republic of Korea, and other anti-communist nations, he was a beloved friend and hero. Simply put, by the time Larry McDonald was named chairman of the John Birch Society in mid-1983, he was the most widely respected anti-communist in the world.
Larry McDonald had become a force to be reckoned with. The good doctor's persona was like a magnet, attracting top names in business, education, industry, communications, government, and religion, including heads of state around the world. They wanted to listen to him, and they acted on his sound advice. He spoke before civic clubs, service groups, churches, to local units of government, and to activist organizations including the John Birch Society. As a member of its National Council since 1967, he was named its national chairman in the summer of 1983. He had big plans for getting it going and growing. At 6'4", his imposing appearance and soft-spoken manner kept audiences riveted to his every word. He had the ability to reduce a complex subject to an easily understood analogy. On the misunderstood question of the inflation of currency and credit, the good doctor explained, "Inflation is a clever process. It's like going to a party where the host refills the punch bowl with water instead of punch. Ultimately," he said, "everyone is drinking plain tap water." Meanwhile, opposing forces had gathered their plans to destroy the McDonald factor in slowing the all-consuming ambitions of the New World Order crowd. The congressman's vision for an American renewal was running on borrowed time, and he knew it. As a medical doctor and surgeon, Congressman McDonald's understanding of the human condition was drawn not only from his education and training as a medical practitioner, but as a member of the human race. And his intellect caused his adversaries to run for cover.
You have people who are part of the elitist structure of this country that have dominated this country openly for 40 years.
I know, but they're not. Is that a conspiracy?
Now, wait a minute. If people quietly working together for evil objectives, two or more, that by definition is a conspiracy. You have, by their own admission, you look at The Tragedy and Hope by Professor Carroll Quigley, who's a member of this elitist group. He says, sure, we've been working this. Sure, we've been collaborating with communism. Yes, we're working for a global accommodation. Yes, we're working for world government. The only thing I object to is that we have kept it a secret. And I think we've gone so far along, we should come out and say,
I bet you $1.50 that Bill Casey doesn't know who Professor Quigley is. I don't.
He's at Georgetown a number of years ago.
He died a couple of years ago, and he wrote The Tragedy and Hope. He's a very noted member of your club, Tom.
Tom, you've got to broaden your reading a little bit.
That's right.
What I ought to do is read more about conspiracies, and that's why I'm interested in what
Well, I'll tell you what you ought to do is go back and look at your founder, Edward Mandell House, because he wrote the book Philip Drew Administrator, and in this, Colonel House said that what he envisioned for the world was a world government along socialist lines as envisioned by Karl Marx. Now, that's your leader. Now, Tom, so you got to go back to the beginning.
Well, his leader was Woodrow Wilson. Do you think he was a communist?
No, I think Woodrow Wilson was his follower. I think Edward Mandell House dominated Wilson, not the other way around.
He caused jaws to drop and windbags to re-examine their shallow positions on current events and political affairs. If Dr. McDonald had identified the groupies of domestic liberalism and international communism and socialism, he was likewise unmasking their paymasters. The big names, the movers and shakers on Wall Street, in Washington, D.C., the roundtable groups and think tanks from coast to coast, which had kept the communist boogeyman alive for more than 3 generations. It was like the Wizard of Oz, whose Toto pulled back the curtain exposing the Wiz, with his levers, dials, and knobs, yelling into his once-hidden microphone, as the over-amplified voice of that frightening image on the wall instructed Dorothy of Kansas, the Tin Man, the Lion, and the Scarecrow to pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Thanks to real heroes like Larry McDonald, hundreds of thousands, perhaps tens of millions of people around the globe now see that the Emperor has no clothes, that we have become tax-paying slaves to an enemy of our own creation. In his The Last Word editorial comment for February 12, 2001, the editor of the New American Magazine asks, "Where have all the heroes gone?" He concludes, "Hope is provided in the fact that we have plenty of genuine heroes and have them still." Question: why did the New American Magazine, an affiliated publication of the John Birch Society, turn its back on Larry McDonald in its June 5, 2000 edition, profiling its list of the top 25 heroes of the 20th century? The New American editor responded to an outraged reader, saying in part, quote, "We tried to emphasize those extraordinary individuals who not only exhibited heroic qualities, but who, in our estimation at least, made a difference in the freedom fight." Is the editor suggesting that Congressman Larry McDonald, who gave his life for his country, didn't make a difference? Further, he said, we had to factor into the equation each candidate's flaws, as well as his attributes. recognizing, of course, that God himself is the only perfect hero, unquote. So why didn't the New American put Jesus Christ at the top of its heroes list? Perhaps the Christ-like image on the Shroud of Turin, said to be the face of Jesus himself, should have appeared at the top of the heroes list. You do get the point. The editor ignores his own argument, using it to suggest that Larry McDonald, chairman of the John Birch Society, had flaws which remove him from the pages of its publication. Another JBS official said this about Larry McDonald, quote, "His shortened life probably prevented many accomplishments from fruition, so that part will always remain unknown," unquote. Isn't that the most incredible statement? In short, Dr. McDonald was taken captive, along with 268 others aboard KAL 007, and probably murdered by a communist enemy. Captain John Birch was murdered in China by a communist enemy. An even more startling comment from the same official said, quote, "As chairman of the society, he certainly paid the supreme sacrifice for his outstanding patriotism, but I would not place him in the same category with many of those that were selected," unquote. Books, articles, and videos abound on what happened to KAL Flight 007. We recommend the book Rescue 007, The Untold Story of KAL 007 and Its Survivors, by Bert Schlossberg. Contrary to published and broadcast reports that the plane was destroyed by an air-to-air missile, the author provides us in its 209 pages new evidence that the plane was safely ditched by its crew off the shores of Monoran Island near Sakhalin, and its survivors, including Dr. McDonald, were taken to Soviet prison camps. To review, and if you wish to order Rescue 007, go to www.xlibris.com. That's xlibris.com. Share this presentation with your congressman, your friends and neighbors, and remind the media about the KAL 007 tragedy and the fate of its 269 passengers and crew, including Dr. Lawrence P. McDonald, an authentic 20th century American hero. This presentation has been provided without charge. Please share it with as many other people as humanly possible. They will thank you for it. Your comments are welcome to Richard W. Fatherly, Post Office Box 172114, Kansas City, Kansas 66117-1114. This has been Richard Fatherly speaking.